Who says we don't need sprint racing in Formula One? I got to put my hand up and say, well, I've been one of them from the start, I think. But now I've got to say I'm beginning to change my mind. That was a sensational 24-lap race on the Saturday afternoon at Interlagos. I'm not sure Kevin Magnussen agrees with that. He was on the pole and kind of sunk like a stone in the Haas Ferrari. But what a race at the front. Max Verstappen took the lead on lap 4. And you would have thought at that point, well, I did think at that point, it was just going to be another Max Verstappen win. But George Russell was in his mirrors, that tenacious terrier, never giving up. And when Max's tyres appeared to go away, first George passed him, then Carlos Sainz passed him, and Max could do nothing, particularly with the move from Carlos, because they had a bit of a skirmish and part of the front wing came away from the Adrian Newey car, and that was kind of it for Max Verstappen. P4 was about the best he could do. And it might even been P5 if the race had been another lap, because Sergio Perez was catching him relatively quickly in the other Red Bull, and he even got on the radio to say maybe Max should slow and give me the position, but they didn't get round to doing that. I'm not sure what will be going on in the Red Bull motorhome afterwards in that particular discussion. But let's not take it away from George Russell and Mercedes. And we've got to say Lewis Hamilton, because he was right in the picture as well. Mercedes looked absolutely superb. I mean, where have they been all year? Where has this race car been? And for those out there that have been thinking that Mercedes have got to go the Red Bull route with their zero pod car that they've had this year, well, if Mercedes took the decision, and they must have taken the decision a long time ago now, took the decision to continue with this theme, then they must be starting to feel pretty vindicated, because that car looked really good. Maybe it's just the increased altitude of Brazil. They've got less drag. They were very competitive on the straights. And Sector 2, which is the middle section, which is all about downforce, the Mercedes was right there, just as it was in Mexico and indeed in Suzuka and other circuits. So just a fabulous result for Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton, incredibly good as well, coming through the field, finishing effectively P2, because Carlos Sainz is starting with that 5-place grid penalty tomorrow, as we mentioned yesterday. So Mercedes on the front row for the Brazilian Grand Prix. Second pole for George Russell. He's on the pole in Hungary. But a great drive from both of them. Let's talk about George first of all. And that was just tenacious. He was wheel to wheel with Max. And before Max's tyres had really gone away, Max was incredible in defence, braking on the absolute limit, never locking up on tyres which appeared to have less grip than the soft Pirelli. We'll get on in a minute to what Max was doing on the medium tyre, but really, really good in defence until eventually with DRS there was just nothing that Max could do about it, and George went past, as indeed did Carlos Sainz with that slight skirmish. And Lewis Hamilton did the same in full view of the grandstands in front of the pits. George's pass took place at the end of the back straight. And so there we were, Mercedes looking brilliant. Now let's talk about Max, because the drama, the shock when the tyre covers came off and it was clear that only Max, and Nicholas Latifi oddly in the Williams, that only Max was on the medium tyre, everybody else is on the soft tyre. What a choice that Max Verstappen, the double world champion, had made for this race. At that moment, you think, has everybody else got it wrong? If Max is doing this, he must have so much in hand in that Red Bull. He's just not going to take any risk with the tyre deg on the soft tyre. He's going with the medium. But let's just have a look at what happened in FP2. It's called FP2, obviously, because qualifying was held yesterday for the sprint race. Let's have a look at what happened when virtually everybody was doing long runs. You don't see sessions like this very often. Unbelievable number of laps put in by every runner on the grid. And this is, they didn't all run soft tyres at the same time, but look at the number of guys that did long runs on the soft tyre. And here we have to look to see what it was about his run on the soft that made Max think that he was going to have to look at the medium as the race tyre. So let's have a look. He's doing 16.6 with the tyres relatively new, and doesn't really get any quicker after that. Then he's doing 17s, high 16s, back into the 17s, 17s, and his top speed isn't great as well. So they've got quite a lot of downforce on that Red Bull, 303 kilometers an hour. Look at, just glance to the right, look what Ferrari are, 300 kilometers an hour. Look, more importantly, where Mercedes are, exactly the same speed, or with give or take a kilometre or two. Now let's have a look at Lewis Hamilton at the length of his run as well, and look at the times he's doing compared with Max. 15-1, 15-9, 15-9, 15-8, 15-8, 15-9, 16-3. I mean, it's pretty impressive, isn't it, that sort of consistency. 17-0, 16-7, 16-1. So he's done, what, he's done sort of 6 or 7 laps in the 15s. Max doesn't even look like getting in the 15s. So then you'd have to say, well, maybe Lewis is running less fuel. But look at the length of the run. I mean, there's no way Max would be running more fuel than he would need to going into the sprint race in FP2. So why would there be any difference in fuel load? So all of a sudden, Red Bull are looking at those Mercedes times thinking, whoa, what's going on here? Then you look at Ferrari, and Ferrari look quicker as well, but not massively quicker than Red Bull. You say, so if it was just Ferrari and Mercedes had never run the soft tyre, I suppose Red Bull might have thought, yeah, we're okay here, you know, maybe Ferrari are playing around with fuel or whatever. But again, just to say, I mean, look at the length of Charles Leclerc's run and the work he was doing on that soft tyre in FP2 this morning. Just amazing. He came in twice, but it looked to be the same set of tyres. And again, top speed, they're lacking a little bit in top speed, Ferrari, 298. And then let's got some other comparison times. I mean, if you look at Lando Norris on the soft tyre, his run is not far away, on average, from Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. Carlos Sainz, similarly, pretty near the Red Bull. And then just to confirm it all, look at George Russell's run, 15-1, 14-9, 15-6, 16-5, 16-3. I mean, that is mind-blowing if you are Adrian Newey and Red Bull. You're thinking, what is going on here? And then just to confirm it, I mean, Pierre Gasly, not slow in the AlphaTauri either, is he? And it goes across and so on. Look at this top speed, by the way, of the AlphaTauri and Esteban Ocon and Fernando Alonso in the Alpine, in the two Alpines, 311, 311, 311, all three of them much quicker than any of the other cars running on softs that I was watching anyway, in a straight line. But that doesn't necessarily translate into a great advantage for the lap, because it means that they're going to be using the tyres harder over the lap. And then we've got to have our pole winner in there, Kevin Magnussen. You know, not too bad either. I mean, he's doing a 17.8, 17.5. Yeah, I see a 17.5 there, or 17.6 for Max Verstappen. So they're thinking, yeah, we're not far away from Red Bull. We're in good shape here. So I think it was that run there on that soft tyre that made Max Verstappen and Red Bull say, well, look, as we're going into the race right now, we ain't going to be that quick, so we might as well do something different. So he ran the medium tyre. Now, it's an interesting choice because on his other run in FP2 this morning, Max ran the hard tyre. They were never going to run the hard tyre in the sprint race, so the only thing they could have run was the medium tyre. But I think the decision was made purely as a result of what we're seeing there on those long runs in the soft tyre. But for the record, let's have a look now at what they did on the hard tyre in FP2. You can see how much running they got crammed into that 1 hour session. So there's Max on the hard tyre, and he's looking more comfortable, isn't he? He's looking a little bit more like Max Verstappen in the Red Bull, 15-0, 16-1, 16-0, 16-1, 15-9, 16-2. You know, you could say, well, you know, a little bit quicker than the Mercedes on average and a little bit more top speed. And Sergio Perez kind of underlining that, although a little less consistent than Max. So on the basis of that, you'd say, yeah, the Red Bull, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to be working on the soft tyre around Interlagos, but it's looking more like the normal RB18 on the more durable tyre. The tyre Max actually ended up racing, of course, though, was the medium tyre. And that didn't get a lot of interest in FP2, apart from the two Ferrari drivers who did a lot of running on that tyre. And I think the interesting thing to look there is to see whether there's any sign of the deg that obviously hit Max in the race, in the sprint race, and indeed whether this is going to be an issue tomorrow with presumably everybody starting on the medium tyre from the get-go. So Charles Leclerc, 16.3, 16.5, 17.1. It's looking reasonably consistent. It's going away a little bit. Carlos Sainz, actually a more impressive run, 16.1, 16.5, 16.9, and then he comes in 16.8, 16.8, 16.7 on his last lap. And Kevin Magnussen also, you can see a progression there of the tyre beginning to lose its grip. And I think more than anything, if you look at Kevin Magnussen's run there on the medium tyre in FP2, that is kind of where Max Verstappen's race went today. Started with a 16.2, ended with a 17.8. Interesting. Likewise, Pierre Gasly is showing a similar pattern in the AlphaTauri when he's on the medium tyre. I don't think Fernando Alonso did enough laps really to be able to jump to any conclusion on that. I think the most significant run was Kevin Magnussen, because you can see there that's exactly the rate of deg that Max had in the race today in the medium tyre. But he went in kind of blind, as I say, because he'd only run the soft and the hard in FP2. So, yeah, a really interesting race. Let's talk about some of the other aspects. Good to see Carlos Sainz racing well, racing hard, going for it, looking like Carlos Sainz again, I think. Really, really good. But a shame he's got to start with that 5-place grid penalty. But Charles Leclerc, who of course was hurt massively by that Ferrari, brilliant Ferrari decision yesterday to have him out on intermediates when everyone else was on slicks and the track was still dry. Started P10, was in traffic for the whole race and finished P6, but he wasn't slow, he was pretty quick. And that P6 will translate, of course, into a P5 with his teammates' penalty tomorrow. Lewis Hamilton, really, really good in traffic. You got to feel for Lewis, though, because he's Lewis, 7 times world champion. He wanted to keep Valtteri Bottas. He can understand, obviously, why Mercedes have gone for a quicker driver. They've got George Russell, who is super quick in the other car. And I thought, it was just a classic irony, wasn't it? If there's going to be a Mercedes win this year, it was always going to go to George. It was never going to go to Lewis. That's just the way of life, even though Lewis has driven very well second half of the year against George. And George had that blemish yesterday as well. But George was perfect today and really aggressive for the short run. He said afterwards, we just don't know what Max and Red Bull would have been like had they started on the soft tyre. I think he's just assuming that they made the wrong choice, and should have been on the soft. But what we've looked at, the evidence there, is that had they been on the soft, it wouldn't necessarily have given the win to Max either. So I don't think that's a given. That's the first point. And I think another very good question is what would have happened had Lewis done a better job in qualifying yesterday. He said, I got more of the rain and the light was going. Well, he was out at the same time as George, and George put in the lap before he went off, and Lewis didn't. So ultimately, that was Lewis's drama. So he started out of position, made very good use of his ability and the car in traffic, and got up to P3 and then P2 effectively, as I say, with Carlos having that penalty. But you'd have to wonder what it would have been like had Lewis started alongside or very near George in the sprint race today, whether he would have beaten George or whether it would have been unbelievable fireworks. So that's the thing we're always talking about. What is going to happen when the two Mercs are really quick and they're capable of winning the race and the two drivers are next to one another? And there were indeed some nasty incidents between teammates in the sprint race. I don't know if it's the sprint race bringing the worst out in everybody or whatever, but we had it between the two Aston Martin drivers and the two Alpine drivers. Let's talk about those first. There was a tough moment at the bottom of the back straight, turn 4, going into turn 4, in which Fernando and Esteban, the two Alpine drivers, collided. Esteban stayed in it. I mean, bearing in mind the tough old nail that Fernando is, you've got to give him credit for that, I suppose. That was probably a racing incident, but there was damage on Ocon's car, and as a result, he was going relatively slowly. And when Fernando came up to pass him, coming out of the last corner onto the straight, there was Fernando's now been given a penalty for basically hitting the back of Esteban's car. And I have to say, I'm not 1,000% convinced about that, because if you look at the onboards of Ocon, look very closely, you can see he's moving the wheel quite a lot. Admittedly, he's going a lot slower because of the damage and he's coming into the pits, but he's, to me, he's not just keeping the wheel absolutely straight, which is what any racing driver needs to be doing on the straight. And I'm making that point because I think all of this goes back to the Lance Stroll incident at the US Grand Prix in Austin, when this guy basically weaved and took Fernando, ironically, took Fernando out. Wouldn't take him out. Fernando kept going and drove brilliantly afterwards, but put him into the wall, let's put it that way. And he got a relatively light rap on the knuckles for that. And A, I think that's wrong. And B, I think it sends a message out, perhaps subliminally, maybe even to other drivers, you can get away with it. It's not that big a deal now. And what we saw with Ocon, I was really surprised to see Esteban moving the wheel that much at that moment bearing in mind the speed differential and bearing in mind it's effectively the straight there, even though there's a kink, which is another point. I mean, the straight is the one place where you do not want to play around with the movement of the car at all, because there's nowhere to go ever really on any straight, on any circuit, and particularly at Interlagos where it's a kink there approaching it. The whole thing, you got the pit lane entry. We've seen horrendous accidents in that part of the track before. And so you know, it's not that I'm a Fernando fan or anything like that. I'm just saying I'm surprised that he's the guy that got the penalty there because, you know, yeah, I mean, they're saying he misjudged the speed differential, but give me a break. I don't think Fernando's capable of doing that for a start. And secondly, Ocon definitely is moving the steering wheel, quite subtly, but he's moving it. And that's significant at that speed when you translate it to how quickly they're going. As for the Aston Martin incident, that was, well, you got to say, Sebastian Vettel has got to be the bravest guy in the world, isn't he? Because A, he knows that Lance Stroll is capable of doing what he did because he did it in Austin. And secondly, he's the boss. And there's no way the boss is going to allow or want the old guy who's retiring in, this is his second last race, passing him and effectively doing him under brakes going into turn 4, is he? I mean, it was so predictable that he was going to move to the left. And there's Sebastian approaching, I don't know what, 300 kilometers an hour with 2 wheels on the grass. Nasty looking incident. And again, you got to say, you know, what is going on? There should be no movement on the straight at all, apart from the toe movement. And then the toe movement is a straightforward motor racing thing. The car in front stays in a straight line and the guy behind goes up under the rear wing and moves left or right, depending on where the room is. But if the guy in front starts moving, the whole thing becomes chronically dangerous. And that's what we're seeing at the moment. And I trace it back to the penalty from Austin not being severe enough. And I think, you know, that's why Stroll's doing it again, because it's not that severe. He got another penalty, I think, but again, it was pretty innocuous. And there's it's hugely disproportionate now, I think, the penalties that have been given for you know, ridiculous things like being on the inside of a corner and using half the road, and the guy who's trying to pass you on the outside is on the boonies and you're the guy that gets the penalty. I mean, that is absurd to me, and I will never ever understand the logic of that rule and the penalties that are given out. And yet we have weaving on the straight in effect, and not weaving, we have, you know, just moving on the straight just to cramp somebody's style at ridiculously high speed with relatively minor penalties, and I think that's wrong. You can't blame the stewards in a way because they're only performing according to the sporting code, I guess, but something needs to be done about this, I think. So going through the results, Sergio Perez, yeah, finished P5, rather uninspiring really, and he was on the soft tyre and doing the same lap times at the end as a little bit quicker than Max, but not much. So that would indicate that Red Bull are in a bit of trouble here at Interlagos on the soft tyre and the medium. That's the reason Max ran the medium tyre quite clearly. And so it'll be really, really interesting to see what they come up with tomorrow, because they haven't been under this sort of pressure, if you can call it pressure, when both championships have been already sealed. But if you can call it pressure, this is the win out there, and it'll be fascinating to see what they come up with, as I say. Charles Leclerc, yeah, you know, 6 was about the best he could do after the schmozzle yesterday. Lando Norris, a little bit disappointing given how quick he was. I mean, if you look at the times he's doing on those long runs, and you can go back and freeze frame them and have a look, you know, he's not slow and in the McLaren, but he couldn't really do very much today other than finish about P7. He got past Kevin Magnussen, as he would. And Sebastian Vettel, for all of that, finished P9, which was good. You know, he deserved that, I thought, and drove well. Pierre Gasly, 10, but he's under investigation as I speak for driving unnecessarily slowly on the formation. I mean, poor Pierre. I say poor Pierre. I shouldn't say that really. But, I mean, is there anybody gets more attention from the stewards than Pierre Gasly? It's just astonishing, isn't it, how much? And Daniel Ricciardo, P11, nearly in the points there, Daniel. Not bad. Not a bad drive. But Mick Schumacher, really, really good. Passed a lot of cars from the back of the grid, finished P12. So good job, Mick. And let's hope that you still have a chance of being in Formula One next year. One race won't do it, but this was a very good recovery drive from where you were. So there we are. That was the sprint race. The big question is, can Red Bull regroup and think of how they're going to get this car to work for them tomorrow? Very different situation, more fuel load Obviously, the tyres are going to be treated differently in the opening laps of the race. Max will be feeling, I guess, not much in love with the medium tyre. Maybe he'll start on the hard. That's the tyre he did the running with this morning. Equally, Mercedes will be feeling very, very bullish about their chances around Interlagos. And what a great circuit it is, isn't it, for Formula One, particularly for a sprint race. I mean, lots of overtaking, some good straights, and also some good fast corners, which are demanding. And just all round, really, really good entertainment for the afternoon. I enjoyed it. Hope you did. Anyway, I'll be back tomorrow and after the race, but during the race or just before the race, remember, I'm going to be doing a watch along, and I'll put the details in the description of this video. So if you wanted to actually listen to my dulcet tones and those of much better qualified observers who'll be talking much more sense than I probably. It will be happening, and you might enjoy it. I hope I'm going to enjoy it. I'm plunging into the dark doing that, but it'll be fun to see how it goes. Anyway, if nothing else, see you tomorrow night after the race. Take care.